So let's just have a little bit a look at some of the information that we know about that. So first of all, we know from the beginning of Amos, the word of the Lord, the words of Amos, 2 years before the earthquake. So he's written it after the fact, after the earthquake has occurred. So I could only assume that at the time he was delivering it verbally, and then after it occurred, he needed to write it down as a testament or as a lesson for others. Right? Zechariah 14 makes reference to it. So you get all these other references outside Amos. It says, you will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. This earthquake happened in the north and in the south. It reached the Philistines over in Gath. Who's remember Gath? I think it's where big tall guy came from, and his 4 brothers, right? Yeah. So Gath. So let's have a look at some of the things. So it turns out that archaeologists have found record of this, that between 766, 765 somewhere, and 751, there was an 8.2 earthquake. Now, I don't know if other people around the world know what an 8.2 looks like, but we do. We've seen 7s, and they're bad enough. This was an 8-pointer. So it caused huge devastation. In fact, there are, see the picture, the long one down the bottom? That's an archaeological team that has gone and found all of this damage relating to Amos's earthquake, because they can carbon date it based on the strata and the rocks and the way the Dead Sea dries, and you have all these accurate layers so you can see when things happened. So they've actually found quite a lot of information about Amos's earthquake. And I mentioned it happened in the north, happened in the south, it happened to the west in Garth. And so Pete, if you wouldn't mind playing that YouTube clip, this is the archaeologist talking about the damage that they found to a building in Garth that they attribute to Amos's earthquake.
We're on ancient Garth of the Philistines, Tel Etzafi, and here we see very, very dramatic evidence of an earthquake which destroyed a brick wall. And you can see here the bricks that fell to the side. They originally were placed on this stone foundation right over here, and then from the energy, the force of this earthquake, the brick wall was pushed over about 2 meters, and then the bricks collapsed to the side. And you can see very nicely the bricks lying here in the state of disorder in which they fell. Now, since we can date this wall to the mid-8th century BCE, this most probably is connected to the destruction, the earthquake destruction, which is mentioned in the book of Amos, chapter 1, verse 1, and perhaps also in the book of Isaiah, chapter 6, verse 4, in which we have evidence from the time of the middle of the Judean monarchy, reports on an earthquake of enormous magnitude which destroyed many settlements. And from the energy that was necessary to move this wall in such a dramatic way, the seismologists believe that we may have an earthquake something like 8 on the Richter scale. And this is clearly a very, very impressive piece of evidence for this event.
Good. I like that. So they have found all this evidence. They've also found, I'll just wait till we get there. Thanks, Pete. They've also found, there's other references to this, and I put a link up there because that's quite a really good, they've got maybe a dozen different independent references trying to substantiate Amos's earthquake. And we're going to have a look at one of these. So I mentioned Josephus, who was this Jewish historian. So he lived between 37 and 100 AD. Right? So he was born just after Jesus has passed and risen from the dead. Jerome was a Christian, and he translated the Bible into Latin. I think it was Jerome. But he lived in the 300s, so he makes reference to it as well. There's something called the Legends of the Jews. It's a book that was published in 1909, whereas somebody actually compiled all these oral legends and things. So there's references to it in there as well. And there's also something really interesting. There's a work called a Targum. Right? We'll explain what a Targum is in a sec. On the book of Isaiah. And it was written by a guy called Jonathan ben Uzziah. And it turns out he was the head student, the best student in the school of Hillel. Now, anyone who's been watching The Chosen, there's all of this drama going on between the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. Yeah? Any chosen people here? What's that? Okay, yes. You know about the school of... Okay, so this guy was their head student in Hillel. In fact, his father got so upset that he disowned him in the inheritance and gave all of his inheritance to the other school, just because he didn't like that school. So, but he was the head guy, and so a Targum, we'll find out, it was originally like an oral translation from Hebrew into whatever the current language was. So if people were around you and they needed to hear the scriptures, you would translate on the fly, right, from Hebrew into whatever, like Greek or whatever the language was. So that's a Targum, but they got written down. So what we want to look at is the Targum he wrote for Isaiah 28, because it makes reference to this. Because here's the kicker, right? The earthquake happened in the north and the south, and it happened at the word of the Lord from Amos, but it happened in the midst of something that we've already explored in the book of Isaiah. It happened at the moment that King Uzziah was offering forbidden incense in the temple. As he was offering the incense, the earthquake struck. So we get this from. So first of all, let's have a look at it. What he says in his Targum. So the Bible, our CSB, says, "For the Lord will rise up as he did at Mount Perazim. He will rise in wrath as at the valley of Gibeon." Right. So that's what we see in the scriptures. When he did his oral translation on the fly, he said, "For as the mountains trembled when the glory of the Lord was revealed in the days of Uzziah." That's interesting. We'll find out what that means when we look at Josephus. "And in the wonders he performed for Joshua in the valley of Gibeon." So you can see he's sort of ad-libbing on the fly as he's quoting this, but he's making reference to something that people knew about. Right? They knew about something happening in the days of Uzziah and the glory of the Lord we know about the mountains trembling, and we know about the glory of the Lord being revealed. So the other historical reference I want to look at is in the book of Josephus, a Jewish historian who records what was happening in the life of Uzziah at the time. And there's quite a lot there, so I haven't got all of it. It says, while Uzziah was in this state, so this was him very prosperous, getting proud, right, and making preparation for futurity, he was corrupted in his mind by pride and became insolent. And this on account of that abundance, which he had of things that will soon perish. So that's at the beginning. Further in the same section it says, accordingly, when a remarkable day was come, and a general festival was to be celebrated, Uzziah, that's he, put on the holy garment, which only the priest is supposed to wear. He put on the holy garment. He went into the temple to offer incense to God on the golden altar, which he was prohibited to do by Azariah the high priest, who had 80 priests with him. Now, this is what we know, right? We know this from 2 Kings, and we also know it from Isaiah, who told him that it was not lawful for him to offer sacrifice, and that none but the posterity, that's the descendants of Aaron, were permitted to do so. And when they cried out that he must go out of the temple and not transgress against God, so they're really upset and saying, you've got to go. Then he, that's the king, was wroth at them. He got really angry, and he threatened to kill the priests unless they hold their peace. Right? So that's what's happening, according to Josephus, in the temple. In the meantime, a great earthquake shook the ground, and a rent was made in the temple, and the bright rays of the sun shone through it and fell on the king's face, insomuch that the leprosy seized him immediately. So this is what the historian says happened at that time. We just heard that he had leprosy and he had to run out of the temple. It records that was the time of the earthquake. Something rent in the roof. The sun came down and they could see this leprosy on his skin. Now look at this. And before the city, at a place called Eroge, half the mountain broke off from the rest on the west and rolled itself 4 furlongs, that's about half a kilometre, and stood still at the east mountain till the roads as well as the king's gardens were spoiled by the obstruction. So half a mountain broke off, rolls over half a kilometre, huge earthquake. And all of this they record happening at the word of Amos, our little shepherd from Tekoa, who's been saying for all this time, you need to repent, you need to repent.